Welcome to this first video lecture on your summer reading. This time it's going to be on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, its major themes, and some of the major elements that I want you to pay attention to as we move through the text. So I've divided this lesson into three major pieces. So one is going to be the characteristics of Romanticism. Two is going to be the major themes in Frankenstein I want you to be aware of here at the beginning of the project. There's some review at the end, so please make sure you hold on to the video all the way to the end. Take notes. You can pause and you can back up if you need to. So this is going to be your first introduction to how I do the video teaching. In this slide on the characteristics of British Romanticism, you're going to find three major elements that I believe are important in Mary Shelley's work. We're also going to see them as major themes in Alan Patton's Cry, the Beloved Country. But as it says there, before discussing the effect of these major characteristics on Mary Shelley's work, it's necessary to lay forth the ideological framework or the ideas behind why the author chose those particular details. So why Mary Shelley relies on the importance of nature or the beauty of the supernatural, or what I think is really an important one, the dangers of technology. So we know that the British Romantic period, 18th century England, was characterized by a marked departure from the ideas and techniques of the literary period that preceded it, which was much more scientific and logical. So Mary Shelley's heavy reliance on nature images, like the tree hit by lightning that sparks, literally and metaphorically, Victor Frankenstein's interest in science. It's placed there on purpose. The authors that Victor Frankenstein reads, from Samuel Taylor Coleridge and the Rime of the Ancient Mariner to Paracelsus, these authors are put into the novel to contrast this conflict between nature imagery and innocence versus knowledge, experience, and all of this. So we think very much that that's why Mary Shelley uses the themes, because the Romantic period was characterized by the marked departure from logic to emotion. And that's a conflict that we're going to see over and over again as the course moves forward. I think another major element here that links these three themes is the idea that Romantic poetry and prose were intended to express a new and visionary relationship to the imagination. The Romantic poets were always seeking a way to capture and represent the sublime moment in experience, that moment where man connects with nature, where his mind and his imagination and his intuition connect with what's around him. When Victor Frankenstein is away from science, when he's not at Ingolstadt, when he's at the family home with Elizabeth walking through nature, he's happy. When he's immersed in his study of science, it goes poorly for him. He wastes away. He stays up all night. He hangs out in not funerals, but he hangs out in cemeteries and crematoriums. So that becomes really kind of an important idea for Mary Shelley in her novel, balancing the importance of the influences of nature and what happens when we turn away from it. This ties directly to the beauty of the supernatural. The supernatural for the Romantics and for Mary Shelley was anything that they could not explain logically. So the supernatural were ghosts, they were visions, they were nightmares that characters had. It was what painters tried to capture in their art. We'll talk about that more as we go through the works that influenced Mary Shelley. The third major theme is the fact that Frankenstein is warning against technological advancement. What happens when man stops relying on God and instead relies on science and technology and what he himself can produce? So the dangers of technology are not just, I don't want to create something or I want to create something better. It's what happens when we replace God with man's own intellect. So all of these things, importance of nature, beauty of the supernatural, and dangers of technology, point very much to what I think is a major theme in the novel, and it's the quest for knowledge, the quest for both necessary and unnecessary knowledge that gets Victor and Henry Clerval and Elizabeth and Justine and some other major characters in trouble. So as you look at this slide, I've given you three major themes, and I've said, look, this ties to the over pursuit or the wrongful pursuit of knowledge. If you look at the bottom of the slide, it says specifically that Mary Shelley embraces and challenges this particular ideal. Now, I'm giving you a singular idea, but I've given you three different ways to go about it. The particular idea is what happens when the imagination gives way to logic, or the natural way that we see the world is so influenced by science that it becomes corrupted. Alan Paton does the same thing in Cry the Beloved Country. So that's important for us to pay attention to as we move through our presentation and get a better understanding of what's happening. Very similar to what I believe Alan Paton does in Cry the Beloved Country. So this next piece of the video presentation is to take our major themes and tie them into how Cry the Beloved Country addresses the same types of ideas. Now, clearly, Cry the Beloved Country is written about South African apartheid in the 20th century, so it doesn't share sort of the same warnings against the pursuit of technology that Mary Shelley's did, but by the same token, it has a lot of the same elements. So take a look at how Alan Paton juxtaposes, and that's a vocabulary term. It means setting two opposites against each other. How he takes the village of Indochine, which is suffering from major drought and its people are suffering, but is also extraordinarily lush and gorgeous, and how Alan Paton in the first chapter really develops the description of the land, and how he focuses on Stephen Khumalo's journey from Indochine to the city of Johannesburg in South Africa. The city represents sort of the corruption of the human being. It's where all the major pressures of money and social failings and any kind of bad thing that happens, it occurs in the city environment. It's relatively free or absent from the countryside, where there's happiness and there's nature and there's this lush beauty. But in the city, we see these major conflicts. For example, Stephen Khumalo is robbed in the city, taken advantage of because he's a kind, sort of almost romantic character, but he comes into an environment that's extraordinarily hostile. So we see that. We see it in his failure to understand what was going on with his son, Absalom, why Absalom was pressured into killing the man that he did. The exact same sort of comparison exists when we talk about Arthur Jarvis and his son. Arthur is a wealthy Afrikaner, which is the Dutch, the South Africans that are descended from the original Dutch. So they're white South Africans, and they're the ones that represent the power. In Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein pursued knowledge, but he came from a wealthy family. So when he was at home around his family, he was safe and he was protected, much like Absalom when he was home in the village, or Arthur Jarvis when he was away from sort of the pressures of Johannesburg and he didn't challenge any of it. It's when our main characters go from one environment to the other. So when Absalom Khumalo, out of fear, murders Arthur Jarvis, it forces our two characters to come together and thus creates our conflict. When Victor Frankenstein goes off to Ingolstadt
to learn and then is sort of immersed in science and he's away from nature, this creates the conflict in the novel. So when we look at our major themes in Frankenstein, power of nature versus the corruptive nature of the city, the exact same premise exists in Cry the Beloved Country. It's just developed in a little bit of a different manner. When we look at this idea of God versus scientific knowledge as another major theme in Frankenstein, we see the exact same thing in Cry the Beloved Country. But it's God and religion and sort of a moral foundation versus a city environment about money, about corruption, where there's racism, there is this socially corrupt environment. So both novels absolutely follow the same ideal in that manner. And what we do with that ideal is look at it for conflict and character development and plot development. The three major things you look at when you're evaluating any kind of summer reading. I want you to take a minute here, now that you're 11 in, to look at what we've accomplished in this activity. We have covered major themes of British Romanticism and how we're going to use that to understand both Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Alan Patton's Cry the Beloved Country. We took a look at conflict. We took a look at some of the major character struggles that are going to occur, such as this need to reconnect with nature and what happens when man gets away from that. We took a look at the idea of God and creation when it comes in conflict with science, and I floated the idea of what happens when man becomes too concerned about his own concepts of knowledge and the over pursuit of knowledge. These are the elements that you have to have in your notes for Tuesday when you walk in. So make sure that you collect those pieces, have a good understanding, and can tie them to specific relationships and specific examples that you see in the text. You have a paper due on Thursday on one of these two novels. So you want to make sure that you have good notes now so it's not too hard to put it together for Thursday. Keep that in mind as we move.
So in this presentation tonight, I reviewed three major elements of British Romanticism as they apply to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I then gave you a quick connection to how that works in Cry the Beloved Country. I'm trying to prepare you in case this is an essay question later on in a paper or something due. We began the discussion of the pursuit of knowledge. More important, we began the pursuit of what happens when we unnecessarily pursue knowledge for the wrong reasons. Notice that I said this is a major theme this year. We're going to go over it over and over again. So a lot of this content that I gave you in this presentation is a warm-up for your summer reading test on Thursday. It is an essay test, a series of short answer questions, no multiple choice, no matching. So anytime there's a flipped lesson, I need to make sure that you have completed everything the way I told you to do it. So I'm going to advance to the next slide with some very specific directions. How do I know? Go to the link posted below and complete what it tells you to do. Notice it's a Moodle link. Notice too that when you try to click on the link in this video presentation that it doesn't work. That's what happens when you convert to video and why I've given you the one special note. I will assess all of this by 8 o'clock on the morning of the next day after a video lesson is due. So make sure you get all of this completed. If you have any sorts of problems, please email me way in advance so I know where you are in the process. Thank you for your time and good luck.